The August heat had driven her to the ground 3 days ago, and now Josephine Mercer lay beneath the vast Montana sky with nothing but her tattered shawl and the clothes on her back, wondering if morning would ever come again. She had left St. Louis 6 months prior with a wagon train headed west, full of hope and desperation in equal measure. Her father's debts had made staying impossible, and the promise of work as a schoolteacher in Helena had seemed like salvation. But cholera had torn through their group like wildfire somewhere near the Dakota border, taking the wagon master and half the travelers with it. The survivors had scattered, some turning back, others pushing forward in smaller groups. Josephine had ended up with a family named Patterson, but they had turned south toward Wyoming 2 weeks ago, and she had foolishly believed she could make the rest of the journey alone with the supplies they had spared her. Her horse had gone lame 4 days out. She had walked until her feet bled through her boots. The creek she had been following dried to nothing but cracked mud. Her food ran out, her water ran out, and finally her strength ran out. Now she lay in the tall grass on the Montana plain, staring up at the scattered diamonds of the night sky, and thought about her mother's face. The stars blurred and multiplied. She closed her eyes. When consciousness returned, the sun was a burning brand against her eyelids. She could not open them. Her lips were cracked and swollen. Someone was speaking, a man's voice, low and urgent. "Easy now, easy. I have got water here, just small sips." Cool liquid touched her mouth and she gasped, trying to swallow too quickly. Strong hands lifted her head gently. "Slow down. You will make yourself sick. That is it, just a little at a time." The water was the most glorious thing she had ever tasted. After a few moments, she managed to open her eyes. A man knelt beside her, silhouetted against the bright sky. He wore a worn hat and had several days of dark stubble on his jaw. His eyes were a startling blue-gray, full of concern. "There you are," he said, and his voice held relief. "Thought I might have found you too late. Name is Matthias Cole. What are you doing out here alone?" She tried to speak, but only a rasping sound emerged. He gave her more water. "Do not try to talk yet. Can you sit up?" With his help, she managed it, though the world spun dangerously. She saw his horse grazing nearby, a sturdy buckskin with full saddlebags. A rifle hung from the saddle. "My name is Josephine Mercer," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was heading to Helena. My horse went lame." His expression darkened. "You walked from where? Days, I do not know any more." He muttered something under his breath that might have been a curse. "Helena is still 40 miles north of here. You would have died out here." "I know," she said simply. Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. She saw him taking in her threadbare dress, the quality of the fabric beneath the dirt, and the educated way she spoke. She was 22 years old, and she had bet everything on a future that had nearly killed her. "Can you ride?" Matthias asked. "My place is about 5 miles west. You need real shelter, food, and rest." "I cannot pay you," she said, hating the words. "I did not ask you to." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on, the sun is only getting hotter." She took his hand and he pulled her up. Her legs nearly gave out, but he caught her easily, one arm around her waist. He was tall and solidly built, the kind of strength that came from years of hard work. He smelled like leather and sage. "I am going to put you on the horse," he said. "Think you can hold on?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He lifted her into the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist to hold the reins, steadying her against his chest. "Just rest," he said quietly. "I have got you." As the horse began to walk, she let herself lean back against him. The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the feeling of safety she had not known in months. She woke on a soft bed in a small room. Afternoon light filtered through a window with real glass panes. The walls were rough-hewn logs, chinked with clay. A simple dresser stood against one wall, and her boots sat cleaned and drying near the door. She was wearing a man's shirt, far too large, and someone had washed her face and hands. Panic fluttered in her chest, but then she heard sounds from beyond the door. The clatter of a pot, footsteps, that same low voice talking to someone. She should wake soon. Yes, I know you are hungry. Patience. Josephine sat up slowly, testing her strength. She was weak but no longer on the edge of collapse. Her feet were bandaged. She stood carefully and made her way to the door, opening it to find a single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting space. Matthias stood at a wood stove, stirring something in a pot. A large yellow dog sat beside him, watching the pot with intense interest. Matthias turned at the sound of the door. You should be resting. I have been asleep for hours, I think. Try a full day and night. It is Tuesday afternoon. She stared at him. I have imposed on you for so long already. You are half dead from exposure and dehydration. Sit down before you fall down. The dog came over to investigate her, tail wagging. She scratched behind its ears, grateful for the friendly presence. That is Samson, Matthias said. He is the one who found you actually. We were checking fence lines and he started barking and would not stop. Followed him about a quarter-mile off the trail to where you were lying. Then I owe him my life, Josephine said, meeting the dog's warm brown eyes. Thank you, Samson. Matthias brought over a bowl of stew and a piece of bread. Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to remember what food is. She obeyed, taking small bites. The stew was simple but good, rich with meat and vegetables. As she ate, she looked around the cabin properly. It was tidy and well made, with solid furniture and a stone fireplace. Books lined a shelf on one wall. The floor was clean-swept wood. You live here alone? She asked. Just me and Samson. I have got 200 acres here, run cattle, some horses, built this place 3 years ago when I bought the land. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and sat across from her at the rough plain table. You said you were headed to Helena. I had a position arranged at a school there, teaching. She set down her spoon. I suppose that is lost now. I was meant to arrive by the end of July. We are into August now, but not far. You could still make it. She nodded, but her heart was not in it. The thought of walking back out into that vast emptiness, even with rest and supplies, made her feel ill. Tell me about St. Louis, Matthias said, changing the subject. I have never been to a city that size. They talked as the afternoon light lengthened. She told him about her childhood there, about her father's bookshop, and how she had grown up surrounded by stories. About her mother's death when she was 16, and how her father had tried to fill the grief with gambling and bad investments. About the morning she had found the eviction notice and realized she had a choice between marrying the landlord's son or leaving everything behind. Sounds like you made the brave choice, Matthias said, or the foolish one. Sometimes they are the same thing. He refilled her coffee. I came out here from Ohio 5 years ago. My family has a farm there, good land, but I have 3 older brothers. There was no place for me, not really. So I saved every penny I could, worked on cattle drives to learn the trade, and bought this land when it opened up. Do you miss Ohio? Sometimes I miss my mother's cooking, but this is home now. I built every inch of this place with my own hands. That means something. She heard the pride in his voice and understood it. He had created something for himself out here in the wilderness, something solid and real. Over the next few days, Josephine grew stronger. Matthias had given her his room and was sleeping in the barn, despite her protests. She spent her time helping where she could, cooking meals and mending the tears in his shirts that he had clearly been ignoring. Her feet healed enough to walk around the cabin area, though Matthias warned her not to go far. There are wolves in the hills, he said, and the creek bed can be treacherous if you do not know where to cross. She was washing dishes one evening when he came in from checking on the cattle. He had been gone most of the day, and she had found herself watching the horizon for his return more anxiously than she wanted to admit. How were they? She asked. Good, found a new calf. Mother is doing fine. He washed his hands in the basin. Josephine, we should talk about your plans. Her hands stilled in the wash water. Of course. I can take you to Helena next week. I need to go into town for supplies anyway. You could inquire about the teaching position, see if it is still available. That is generous of you. But, he had heard the hesitation in her voice. She dried her hands on a cloth, not looking at him. "I have been thinking. Even if the position is still open, I have no money for lodging until my first pay. I have no references, having lost everything when my supplies were abandoned. I am not even certain I can explain where I have been without sounding like a complete fool. You nearly died. That is not foolish. It was foolish to think I could make the journey alone." She finally met his eyes. "I have been a burden to you and I hate it, but I do not know what else to do." Matthias was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You have not been a burden. This cabin has felt more like a home in the past few days than it has since I built it." Her breath caught. "Matthias, I know I do not have the right to ask anything of you. I am just a cattleman with a small holding and rough manners. But if you wanted to stay, I could use help around here. I could pay you wages and you would have shelter and food. It would give you time to figure out what you really want." "You mean work for you?" "I mean have a place here if you want it." He rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. "I am saying this poorly. What I mean is that you do not have to leave if you do not want to." She felt something warm unfold in her chest. "I would like to stay, at least for a while." The smile that crossed his face transformed it entirely. "Good, that is good." That night, lying in the dark, Josephine thought about the strange path her life had taken. A month ago, she had been dying under the stars. Now she was in a solid cabin with a good man who had asked her to stay. It felt like a dream, fragile and unreal. But in the morning, it was still true. Matthias showed her around the property properly, introducing her to the dozen cattle, the 3 horses, and the chickens that lived in a coop behind the cabin. He taught her how to collect eggs and how to tell which mushrooms growing near the creek were safe to eat. He pointed out landmarks, the stand of cottonwoods that meant water, the rocky hill where he had seen a cougar once, the neighbor's fence line 3 miles south. "That is the Patterson place," he said. "John Patterson and his wife Ruth. Good people. They have a daughter about your age, I think. Are there many homesteads out here? More than there were. The railroad brought people. Some make it, some do not. The winters are hard and the summers can be brutal. You have to be stubborn to survive. You seem to manage." "I am very stubborn." He grinned at her and she found herself smiling back. The days fell into a rhythm. She cooked and kept the cabin clean, mended clothes, and tended the garden plot behind the house that had been struggling from neglect. Matthias worked the cattle and horses, mended fences, and hunted for meat. In the evenings, they would sit outside and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. They talked about everything and nothing. She learned that he loved to read but had few books. She learned that he played the harmonica badly but enthusiastically. She learned that he was 30 years old, that he had never been in love, that he wanted to build his herd to 50 head and maybe hire a hand to help with the work. He learned that she could recite poetry from memory, that she was terrified of spiders but not snakes, that she had always wanted to see the ocean. He learned that she hummed while she cooked and that she had a habit of tucking her hair behind her ear when she was thinking hard about something. 6 weeks after he had found her, they rode together to Helena for supplies. The town was bustling with miners and merchants, freight wagons, and fine carriages. Josephine felt like she had stepped into another world after the quiet isolation of the ranch. They visited the general store, where Matthias bought flour and sugar, coffee and ammunition. Josephine found herself looking at bolts of fabric, touching the calico and gingham with longing. She had been wearing Matthias's old shirts and a pair of his pants cinched with a belt, her own dress having been too damaged to save. "Pick out what you want," Matthias said, appearing beside her. "You need proper clothes. I cannot ask you to spend money on me. You are not asking. I am offering. Besides, you have been working hard. Consider it wages." She chose a simple brown cotton for a skirt and a blue calico for a shirt waist. Matthias added a wool shawl without asking, saying, "You will need it when the weather turns." They were loading the supplies into the wagon when a woman's voice called out. "Matthias Cole, is that you?" A handsome woman in her 40s approached, dressed in a fine burgundy dress with jet buttons. Her dark hair was styled elaborately and she carried a parasol. "Mrs. Donovan," Matthias said, his tone polite but cool. "How are you?" "I am well, thank you. I see you have a companion." Her eyes swept over Josephine with undisguised curiosity. "This is Miss Josephine Mercer. She is staying at my place. Josephine, this is Mrs. Margaret Donovan. She owns the hotel here." "How do you do?" Josephine said, "staying at your place." Mrs. Donovan's eyebrows rose. "How modern of you, Mr. Cole." "She works for me," Matthias said, his voice flattening. "Is there something you needed, Mrs. Donovan?" "Not at all. I was simply surprised." "You have always been so solitary." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "Do be careful, Miss Mercer. The frontier can be unforgiving to a woman's reputation." After she swept away, Josephine felt her cheeks burning. "I did not think about how it would look." "Do not let her get to you," Matthias said, anger in his voice. "Margaret Donovan thrives on gossip. She does not know anything about your situation." But the encounter had unsettled her. That night back at the cabin, she brought it up again. "Maybe I should try to find a position in town after all. I do not want to damage your standing in the community." Matthias set down the piece of tack he had been mending. "My standing? Josephine, I do not give a damn what Margaret Donovan thinks. And anyone whose opinion I actually care about would understand that I helped someone in need." But she was right. A young woman living alone with a man, it is not proper. Then we will make it proper. He stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to her. "I have been thinking about this for weeks now, trying to figure out the right way to say it. I guess there is no right way, so I will just say it plain. Marry me." Josephine's heart stopped. "What?" He turned to face her. "I know I am not what you probably imagined for yourself. I am not educated like you, and I do not have much to offer beyond this land and what I can build on it. But I care about you, Josephine, more than I have cared about anyone. I wake up in the morning and the first thing I think about is that you are here. I come in from work and the cabin smells like bread and I hear you singing, and it feels like everything I have been working toward finally makes sense." She could not breathe. "Matthias, you do not have to answer now. I just want you to know that I am serious. It would not be a marriage of convenience, not for me. I have feelings for you, real feelings." He ran a hand through his hair. "But if you do not feel the same way, if you want to go to Helena and teach school, I will take you there and I will not hold it against you. I just needed you to know that there is another choice. You could stay here as my wife if you wanted." Tears blurred her vision. "You found me dying under the stars with nothing. You gave me everything. How could I not have feelings for you?" Hope lit his face. "Is that a yes?" "It is a yes." He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She wrapped her arms around his neck, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than taking, and she kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will build you a better house, something with real windows and a proper bedroom. I will make this place worthy of you." "It is already worthy," she whispered, "because you are in it." They married 3 weeks later in Helena, with John and Ruth Patterson as witnesses. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Ruth had helped her sew, and Matthias wore his best shirt and looked so handsome her heart ached. The ceremony was brief, conducted by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. But when Matthias slipped his grandmother's gold ring onto her finger, Josephine felt the weight of the promise it represented. The Pattersons hosted a small celebration dinner at their homestead, and Josephine met their daughter Emma, a bright girl of 19 who was thrilled to have another young woman nearby. Emma chattered excitedly about the local social events, the barn dances and church picnics, and Josephine realized that she was now part of a community, not just passing through. On the ride back to their cabin, Matthias held her close on the wagon seat. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am. Are you?" "Happier than I knew I could be." That night, he carried her over the threshold of the cabin and she laughed at the tradition. He set her down gently, and then his hands were in her hair and his mouth was on hers, and she forgot about everything except the feeling of being wanted and cherished. Later, lying in the darkness with her head on his chest and his arm around her, she said, "I was so frightened when I was out there dying. I thought I had made a terrible mistake leaving St. Louis, but it brought me here. It brought me to you." "I used to think I was happy alone," he said, his voice rumbling under her ear. "Now I cannot imagine it. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Josephine Cole." She smiled at her new name. "I love you, Matthias. I love you too, so much." Autumn came to Montana in a blaze of gold and crimson. Josephine marveled at the beauty of it, the aspen groves turning brilliant yellow against the dark evergreens, the sky impossibly blue and vast. Matthias taught her to ride properly, and they would explore the rangeland together, checking on cattle and watching for early snows in the mountains. He began work on expanding the cabin, just as he had promised. Every spare moment he had, he was cutting timber and planning. Josephine helped where she could, handing him tools and learning the basics of construction. "I want to add 2 rooms," he explained, showing her his rough sketches. "A proper bedroom for us and another room that can be whatever you want. A sitting room, maybe, or a study where you can read." "Or a nursery," she said quietly, his head snapped up. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" She nodded, her face breaking into a smile. "I think so. It is early yet, but I am fairly certain." He dropped the hammer he was holding and swept her up, spinning her around. "A baby." "We are going to have a baby. Be careful," she laughed. "You will make me dizzy." He set her down but kept his arms around her. "When? Late spring, I think. April or May. I need to finish the addition before then. I need to build a cradle. I need to." She put her hand over his mouth. "You need to breathe. We have time." But she loved seeing the excitement in his eyes, the wonder. That night he kept touching her belly gently, as if trying to feel the life growing there, even though it was far too early. Winter arrived with shocking speed. One day the weather was mild, and the next, a blizzard swept down from the mountains and buried the ranch in 3 feet of snow. They were trapped inside for days, keeping the fire burning and rationing their supplies. Matthias would bundle up and fight his way to the barn to tend the animals, coming back red-faced and covered in ice. Josephine worried constantly. The addition was not finished, only partially framed and useless against the cold. They huddled together at night under every blanket they owned, and she thought about how close she had come to dying alone under the stars just months ago. Now she was here, warm and safe and loved, with a baby growing inside her. When the storm finally broke, the world was transformed into a wonderland of white. Matthias dug paths to the barn and the chicken coop, and slowly life returned to normal. The snow stayed through December and January, and they celebrated Christmas quietly together, exchanging small gifts. He gave her a book of Keats' poetry that he had ordered from a catalog. She gave him a new leather belt she had made herself from scraps, tooled with his initials. "It is perfect," he said, running his fingers over the letters. "You made this. John Patterson showed me how. I wanted to give you something I made with my own hands, since you have built everything here that way." He kissed her softly. "Best gift I ever received." In February, when the days began to lengthen and the worst of the cold had passed, Matthias finished the addition. The new bedroom had a real wood floor and a large window facing east to catch the morning sun. He had built a bed frame and even carved flowers into the headboard, working on it secretly in the barn. "It is beautiful," Josephine said, running her hand over the smooth wood. "Matthias, you have such skill. I wanted to make something special for you, for us." He looked around the new space with satisfaction. "And the second room is ready for when the baby comes. I will start on the cradle next week." But when she walked into the second room, she gasped. Above the doorway, he had carved a wooden plaque with letters burned into it, "Josephine's cabin." "What is this?" she asked, tears springing to her eyes. "This is your place," he said, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her growing belly. "I built it for you. I built all of it for you. I want you to know that you are not just living in my house. This is your home with your name on it." She turned in his arms, crying in earnest now. I thought I had nothing. I was sleeping under the stars with no shelter, certain I was going to die. And then you found me, you brought me here, you built me a home, you gave me everything. You gave me everything, he said, wiping her tears. Before you, this was just a place to sleep. Now it is a home because you are in it. You are my home, Josephine. They held each other in the doorway of the new room, beneath the sign with her name, and Josephine felt a peace she had never known. She had been lost, and now she was found. She had been alone, and now she was loved. Spring came slowly to Montana, the snow melting in patches and revealing the brown grass beneath. Josephine grew round with the baby, moving more carefully but still insisting on doing her share of the work. Matthias hovered anxiously, trying to make her rest. I am pregnant, not an invalid, she said, laughing at his concern. I know, but what if something happens? Maybe we should have Ruth come stay with us. When the time gets closer, yes. But for now, I am fine. The cradle he built was a masterpiece, smooth and sturdy with rockers that moved soundlessly. He placed it in the new room, and Josephine filled it with blankets she had sewn during the long winter evenings. Everything was ready. In late April, on a morning when the meadowlarks were singing and the first wildflowers were blooming, Josephine woke Matthias before dawn. It is time, she said calmly, though her hand gripped his tightly. He bolted upright. Now, are you sure? Very sure. He rode to the Patterson place in record time, returning with Ruth, who took charge immediately. She sent Matthias outside to pace and boil water, standard orders for anxious fathers. Josephine labored through the morning and into the afternoon, with Ruth coaching her and holding her hand. You are doing wonderfully, Ruth said. Not much longer now. Matthias could hear Josephine crying out, and each sound was like a knife to his heart. He wanted to be with her, but Ruth had been firm. This was women's work. So he paced in the yard, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in, making bargains and promises. Finally, as the sun was lowering toward the horizon, he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, strong and furious. He froze, hardly daring to hope. Ruth appeared at the door, smiling. You can come in now, Papa. Come meet your son, his son. He had a son. Matthias walked into the cabin on shaking legs. Josephine was propped up in their bed, looking exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was like the sun. Come meet Thomas, she said softly. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny red face of his son. Thomas had a shock of dark hair and unfocused blue eyes. His small fist waved in the air, and Matthias offered his finger. The baby gripped it with surprising strength. He is perfect, Matthias said, his voice rough with emotion. You are perfect. I cannot believe he is ours. Believe it, Josephine said. He has your stubborn chin already. Ruth left them alone, promising to return the next day to check on them. Matthias stretched out beside Josephine on the bed, and together they marveled at the miracle they had created. Thomas made small sounds, and Josephine fed him while Matthias watched in wonder. A year ago, I was sleeping under the stars thinking I was going to die, Josephine said. Now I am here with you and our son in a home with my name on it. How did my life become so beautiful? Same way mine did, Matthias said, kissing her forehead. We found each other. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. Thomas grew strong and healthy, learning to walk and then run across the range island. When he was 2, Josephine became pregnant again, and this time she gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, with her mother's green eyes and a sweet disposition. Matthias expanded the herd to 40 head, then 50. He hired a young man named Daniel to help with the cattle work, and the ranch prospered. Josephine started a small school in their cabin during the winter months, teaching the handful of children from neighboring homesteads. She loved watching them learn, and Matthias loved watching her do work that clearly fed her soul. When Thomas was 5 and Clara was 3, they added another room to the cabin. And when Thomas was 7, another baby arrived, a boy they named Samuel, who came into the world during a summer thunderstorm. announcing himself with lusty cries that could be heard over the thunder. The cabin with Josephine's name above the door grew and changed, but it remained the center of their world. On warm evenings, they would sit on the porch they had built, watching their children play in the yard while the sun set over the mountains. Matthias would hold Josephine's hand, and sometimes they would talk about the old days, but mostly they just enjoyed the peaceful contentment of a life well lived. "Do you ever regret not going to Helena?" Matthias asked one evening when the children were finally asleep. "Not becoming a teacher in town." "I am a teacher," Josephine said. "I teach our children and our neighbors' children, and before that I taught you how to make decent biscuits, remember?" He laughed. "They were terrible before you came along, I will admit it." "Besides," she continued, snuggling against his side, "I have everything I ever wanted right here. A home, a family, a man who loves me. What more could I possibly need?" "Nothing," he said, kissing the top of her head. "We have it all." Years continued to pass in the way they do in a happy life, marked by seasons and milestones rather than hardship. Thomas grew tall and serious, showing an aptitude for working with horses that amazed even Matthias. Clara became her mother's shadow, learning to read early and always carrying a book in her pocket. Samuel was the wild one, always exploring, always getting into mischief, keeping them all laughing. When Thomas turned 15, Matthias began teaching him the full scope of running the ranch, trusting him with more responsibility. Josephine taught Clara advanced mathematics and literature, preparing her for the teaching examination she wanted to take when she turned 18. Samuel declared he was going to be a veterinarian and spent all his time studying the animals. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Matthias surprised Josephine with a trip to Helena. They left the children in Ruth Patterson's capable care and spent 3 days in the hotel, attending a theatrical performance and dining in a restaurant with white tablecloths. It felt impossibly fancy after their simple life, and they laughed at themselves for being impressed. "I am glad we did this," Josephine said, holding his arm as they walked down the main street. "But I will be glad to get home too." "Me too," Matthias agreed. 15 years ago, I never could have imagined my life would turn out like this. I thought I would always be alone." "I am grateful every day that you found me," she said seriously. "I do not know what divine providence led you and Samson to that particular stretch of land on that particular day, but I will never stop being thankful for it. I am the one who should be grateful. You could have gone to Helena. You could have left Montana entirely, but you stayed. You chose this life, chose me. Best choice I ever made." That night, lying in the hotel bed with the sounds of the city outside, Matthias held her close. "I want you to know something. Everything I have built, the ranch, the herd, all of it, it is for our children. For their future. But the cabin, the original cabin with your name on it, that is yours. Always. I had papers drawn up years ago. If anything ever happens to me, that land and that cabin are in your name. You will always have a home." Tears filled her eyes. "Nothing is going to happen to you. We are going to grow old together, watching our grandchildren play in that yard. I plan on it," he said. "But I needed you to know you will always be protected, always be taken care of." She kissed him deeply. "I already knew that. You have been taking care of me since the day we met." They returned home to find the children had attempted to cook dinner and made a spectacular mess, but everyone was happy and healthy. Samson, now gray around the muzzle and moving slower, greeted them with his tail wagging furiously. Matthias scooped up Samuel, who was only 7, while Thomas and Clara talked over each other, describing everything that had happened in 3 days. "It is good to be home," Matthias said, looking around at his family in the cabin he had built. And Josephine agreed completely. More years passed, bringing changes but not diminishing the love that was the foundation of their lives. Thomas married a kind girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch and built his own cabin on the far corner of their land. Clara passed her teaching examination with flying colors and took a position at the new school in Helena, though she came home every few months for extended visits. Samuel, true to his childhood dream, went to university to study veterinary medicine, writing long letters home about his studies. Josephine and Matthias, now in their 40s, found themselves alone in the cabin more often. Rather than feeling empty, it felt peaceful. They had raised their children well and sent them into the world with confidence, and they still had each other. "Remember when you proposed to me?" Josephine asked one evening as they sat on the porch. "You said you were not educated like me and did not have much to offer." "I remember. I felt like I was aiming too high, asking someone like you to marry someone like me. You were wrong about not having much to offer. You offered me everything. A home, security, love, respect, partnership. You offered me a life I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams." She took his hand. "These have been the happiest 23 years of my life." 23 years, he marveled, feels like both forever and no time at all. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every moment, every challenge, every joy." He pulled her close, and they watched the sun set over their land, the land they had worked together, the land where they had raised their family. The cabin behind them, with Josephine's name still carved above that door, stood solid and strong, a testament to what they had built together. Thomas and Sarah gave them their first grandchild the following spring, a boy they named Matthias, after his grandfather. Josephine cried when she held him, marveling at the circle of life, at how she had once been the one giving birth while Ruth helped, and now here she was helping Sarah while Thomas paced anxiously outside, just as Matthias had done. "He is perfect," Josephine told Sarah. "Absolutely perfect." Matthias the elder held his grandson with shaking hands, looking down at the tiny face with awe. "Hello there, little one. Welcome to the ranch." They became devoted grandparents, and the sound of a baby's laughter once again filled the cabin. Clara came home for the birth and stayed for a month, unable to tear herself away from her nephew. Samuel wrote that he would visit as soon as his examinations were complete. "Our family keeps growing," Josephine said happily, watching Matthias show his grandson the horses, even though the baby was far too young to understand. "That it does," Matthias agreed. "And to think it all started with a dying woman under the stars and a stubborn cowboy who decided to build her a cabin." "Best decision you ever made," she teased. "Second best," he corrected. "Best decision was asking you to marry me. Building the cabin was just the foundation." Over the next decade, more grandchildren arrived. Thomas and Sarah had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. Clara married a fellow teacher and moved back to Montana, settling in Helena but visiting often. Samuel completed his studies and opened a veterinary practice in Great Falls, eventually marrying a farmer's daughter who shared his love of animals. Each of their children brought their own babies to visit the ranch, and the cabin was often filled with the chaos and joy of multiple generations. Josephine, now in her mid-50s with silver threading through her dark hair, had never been happier. She taught her grandchildren their letters, told them stories, and watched them explore the same land their parents had explored. Matthias, gray and weathered but still strong, taught the older grandchildren to ride and work cattle, passing on the knowledge he had accumulated over decades. "You think they will remember us?" Josephine asked one night after a particularly lively family gathering. "When they are grown and we are gone, do you think they will remember these days?" "They will remember," Matthias said with certainty. "We are teaching them more than just skills. We are teaching them what it means to love, to work hard, to build something lasting. That does not get forgotten." "I hope you are right. I want them to know how much we love them. They know. Look at how they run to us when they arrive, how they hug us goodbye. They know." On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around. There was music and dancing, enormous amounts of food, and toasts that made Josephine cry and Matthias embarrassed. Thomas stood and spoke about growing up on the ranch, about the love his parents had shown him and his siblings, about how they had built something extraordinary out here in the wilderness. "My father found my mother dying under the stars," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the crowd. He brought her here, he built her a cabin, and he put her name on it. That is the kind of man he is. That is the kind of love they share. And that is what they taught us, that real love is about building something together, about creating shelter for the people you care about putting their name on what you create so they know they belong. The crowd applauded, and Josephine saw Matthias wiping his eyes. She squeezed his hand and he squeezed back. Not bad for a couple of people who met under less than ideal circumstances, she whispered. Not bad at all, he agreed. As the party continued around them, they slipped away to the porch of the original cabin, the one with her name still visible above the door, though weathered by 30 years of Montana sun and snow. They could hear music and laughter from the yard, could see their children and grandchildren dancing and playing in the golden evening light. I have been thinking, Matthias said. When we are gone, I want this cabin to stay in the family. I want it preserved, your name and all. It is where our story started, where our children were born. It should be remembered. It will be, Josephine assured him. Our grandchildren already love it. Little Matthias was playing under the sign today, asking me what it meant. I told him it means home. That is exactly what it means. He put his arm around her and she leaned into him the way she had been doing for 30 years. Thank you, Josephine. For what? For staying, for choosing me, for building this life with me, for every single day of these 30 years. Thank you for finding me, she said. For seeing someone worth saving when I was at my lowest. For building me a home and putting my name on it. For loving me the way you do. They sat together as the sun set on their anniversary celebration, as their family laughed and loved around them, as another day ended on the land they had claimed together. The cabin stood strong behind them, a monument to love and perseverance, to a cowboy who had built shelter for a woman who had none, to a woman who had chosen to stay and make that shelter a home. Years continued to add up, bringing the joys and sorrows that come with a long life. Matthias's brother passed away in Ohio, and he traveled back for the funeral, taking Josephine with him. She finally met the family he had left behind, and they welcomed her warmly. Samson died peacefully in his sleep at the remarkable age of 16, and they buried him under the cottonwood tree where he used to lie in the shade. They got a new dog, a young border collie that Samuel brought them, and named him Scout. Josephine developed a cough one winter that worried everyone, but Ruth Patterson, now in her 80s but still sharp, dosed her with herbs and scolded her into resting, and she recovered. Matthias injured his back moving a fallen tree and spent a month furious at his body's limitations, but he healed. They grew older together, their bodies aging but their love remaining constant. Matthias's hands developed arthritis, and Josephine's hair went completely white. They moved slower, tired more easily, but they were still themselves, still devoted to each other. On their 40th anniversary, they had a quiet celebration, just the two of them. Their children had wanted to throw another party, but they had requested something simple. 40 years, Josephine said, sitting in her rocking chair on the porch. That is a long time. Not long enough, Matthias said from his own chair. I want 40 more. I do not think that is how it works, my love. Then I want whatever time we have left, and I want every minute of it to be with you. She reached over and took his hand. Their fingers interlaced automatically the way they had thousands of times before. I was so scared when I was lying under those stars. I thought my life was over before it really began. I thought I had failed at everything. And instead, you built a family, taught dozens of children, created a home that has sheltered multiple generations. You did not fail, Josephine, you triumphed. We triumphed, she corrected. Everything I did with you by my side. That night, lying in their bed in the room he had built for her 40 years ago, Matthias held her close. I need you to promise me something, anything. If I go first, do not give up, do not stop living. Stay here in this cabin, surround yourself with our family and live every day fully. Promise me. Only if you promise the same, she said, her voice thick with tears. If I go first, you keep going, you keep loving our family and living on this land. I promise. Then I promise too. They sealed it with a kiss, tender and sweet, the kiss of two people who had loved each other for 40 years and would love each other until their last breath. Matthias lived to 75, still sharp-minded and present until the very end. He passed away peacefully one autumn morning with Josephine holding his hand and all three of their children at his bedside. His last words were, "I love you, Josie. Thank you for everything." Josephine mourned deeply but kept her promise. She stayed in the cabin, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She continued teaching, continued tending her garden, continued living. The sign with her name above the door became even more precious to her, a reminder of the man who had loved her enough to give her a home, to put her name on something solid and lasting. She lived another 8 years, watching more great-grandchildren born, seeing Thomas take over the ranch completely, seeing Clara retire from teaching with honors, seeing Samuel's veterinary practice become one of the most respected in Montana. She told stories about their grandfather, about the day he found her dying and brought her home, about how he had built everything with his own hands. On her 80th birthday, surrounded by more family than she could easily count, she sat in her rocking chair on the porch and looked out over the land she had called home for more than 50 years. "Tell us again, grandmother," one of her great-granddaughters asked. "Tell us how you and grandfather met." So she did, one more time. She told them about the wagon train, about the cholera, about being lost and alone and dying under the vast Montana sky. She told them about a cowboy named Matthias and his dog Samson finding her, about being brought to a small cabin and given water and hope. She told them about falling in love, about him proposing awkwardly in this very room, about the sign he had carved with her name. "He built all of this for me," she said, her voice still strong despite her age. "When I had nothing, when I was sleeping under the stars with no shelter, he built me a cabin and put my name on it. That was love. That was the foundation of everything that came after." "We still have the sign," Thomas said. "It will stay there as long as this cabin stands." "Good," Josephine said, satisfied. "Let it stand as a reminder. Love is not just words or feelings. Love is action. Love is building something for the person you care about. Love is giving them shelter, giving them a place to belong, putting their name on what you create together." She passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 months later, in the bed in the room Matthias had built for her, in the cabin that bore her name. Her children buried her next to Matthias under the cottonwood trees, and the entire community came to pay their respects to a woman who had touched so many lives. Thomas kept his promise to his father. The original cabin was preserved exactly as it had been, with Josephine's name still above the door. As the ranch passed to the next generation and the one after that, the cabin became a treasured landmark, a piece of family history. Great-great-grandchildren would visit it, would trace the letters of her name carved into the wood, and would hear the story of the cowboy who found a dying woman under the stars and loved her enough to build her a home. The cabin stood for generations, a testament to love, to perseverance, to the simple act of giving someone shelter when they had none. It stood as proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead to the best, that being lost can mean being found, and that true love is built one board, one nail, one day at a time, until something solid and lasting stands where once there was nothing but empty land and stars. And above it all, Josephine's name remained, carved by loving hands, a permanent reminder that she had been there, that she had been loved, that she had mattered. The woman who had been sleeping under the stars with no shelter had found her home, and her name on that cabin told everyone who saw it that she had belonged there, completely and forever, in the heart of the cowboy who had built it, and in the land they had claimed together.